"Don't throw me out. I'll warm your bed," she pleaded, but he chose to warm her heart first. The city, usually alive with noise and movement, felt quiet and almost deserted. In the midst of this icy silence, a man named Daniel walked briskly toward his apartment, his hands deep in his coat pockets. He had just finished a long shift at the local factory, and his body ached from hours of labor. His mind, too, felt heavy, weighed down by the monotony of his life and the sadness of personal losses he carried quietly in his heart. As he approached his building, something unusual caught his eye. Sitting on the steps leading to the entrance was a young woman, her small frame hunched over as if trying to make herself as small as possible. Her clothes were thin and tattered, completely inadequate for the biting cold. A small, worn bag rested by her side, the only thing she seemed to own. Her face, pale and chapped from the wind, was turned toward him, and her eyes, large, dark, and tired, looked up with a mixture of fear and hope. Daniel paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had seen homeless people before, of course, but something about her presence in this quiet part of the city felt different. It wasn't just the cold or the night. It was the look in her eyes, a mix of desperation and vulnerability that tugged at something deep within him. "Are you okay?" he asked cautiously, keeping his voice gentle. The woman shivered and looked down at her hands, which she had tucked under her knees. I, I have nowhere to go," she admitted softly, almost ashamed. "They asked me to leave the shelter today. I don't know where to sleep." He remembered a time in his own life many years ago when he had nowhere to turn, when the world had seemed cold and uncaring. He knew the feeling of being rejected, the hopelessness that came with the thought that nobody cared whether you lived or froze that night. He took a step closer, trying not to seem threatening. "It's really cold tonight," he said, noticing how her small body trembled. "You shouldn't stay out here." He realized she wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was trying to survive, and in her panic she had said the first thing that came to mind. He had no intention of taking advantage of her vulnerability, and yet her words left him momentarily speechless. He took a deep breath and shook his head gently. "No, that's not what I mean," he said, keeping his tone firm but kind. "You don't have to do anything like that. You just need to be safe tonight." "Here," he said, handing it to her. "This will help keep you warm, and I have some hot tea and a snack inside. You can come in for a little while, just until the cold passes. Just come inside, you'll be safe here." He went to the kitchen and poured hot tea into a mug, offering it to her. The aroma of the warm drink seemed to reach her soul before it reached her senses. She took the mug with both hands, her fingers brushing against his as she did. A silent apology passed between them, though no words were spoken. She sipped the tea slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through her body. Daniel watched quietly, giving her space while also remaining present. He didn't ask questions about her past, didn't demand explanations. He simply offered comfort, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she sat there, wrapped in the blanket and sipping the tea, her eyes began to soften. She started to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in hours. For Daniel, the night was quiet, but it was also full of meaning. He thought about his own life, the ways he had closed himself off after losing people he loved. He had spent years isolating himself, thinking that kindness and human connection were luxuries he could no longer afford. Yet here was a stranger, someone in need, reminding him that small acts of compassion could heal wounds he didn't even know were still open. Hours passed in this quiet companionship. The woman eventually curled up on the chair, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, and let herself drift into a light, peaceful sleep. Daniel stayed awake, sitting nearby, watching over her. He thought about the world outside, the cold streets, the indifferent passers-by, the harshness of life that could make someone feel invisible. But in this small apartment, he realized, they had created a different kind of world, one built on care and human decency. The night was long, but it was not lonely. Daniel felt a strange warmth, not just from the heater or the blanket, but from the knowledge that he had made a difference. He had chosen to act with empathy, to see the humanity in someone who had been abandoned by circumstance. And for the young woman who had spent so many nights shivering in fear, this night was the first where she felt safe, seen, and valued. As the hours crept toward dawn, Daniel reflected on the choices people make in desperate moments. Some choose fear or anger. Others choose compassion, even when it requires sacrifice. He understood that his small act of kindness might not change the world, but it could change one person's life, and in doing so, it had already changed his own. By the time the first light of morning began to filter through the blinds, the woman was still asleep, peaceful and unaware of the world's cruelty outside. Daniel quietly prepared a small breakfast, setting it beside her chair so she could eat when she woke. He left a note beside it, simple words of encouragement. "You are stronger than you think. Take one step at a time." He stepped back, looking at her for a moment, and smiled softly. Tonight he had not given her shelter merely from the cold. He had offered her warmth in a deeper, more meaningful way, the warmth of care, respect, and human kindness. For both of them, it was a night they would never forget. One had found courage and trust again, while the other rediscovered hope and purpose. In a world often too harsh and unforgiving, a small act of compassion had created a space where two lives intersected in the simplest, yet most profound, way. Through understanding, empathy, and the willingness to help another human being, morning light slowly crept through the thin blinds of the small apartment, casting a soft glow across the room. The young woman stirred, her eyes blinking open as she adjusted to the warmth and brightness of the morning. For a moment she felt disoriented. The cold night was gone, replaced by a quiet, safe space she could hardly believe existed. She had expected to wake up on the street, cold and alone, perhaps shivering and scared. But now she found herself wrapped in a warm blanket, sitting on a chair with a small pillow behind her, and a gentle aroma of breakfast filling the room. She looked around cautiously, almost afraid that reality might vanish and she would be back in the harsh streets. Then she noticed the small plate of food on the table beside her, a simple breakfast of bread, fruit, and a cup of tea. Next to it was a short note, written in neat handwriting. "You are stronger than you think. Take one step at a time." Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that someone cared for her simply for being human. She looked toward the corner of the room where Daniel was quietly tidying up. He hadn't intruded or forced conversation. He had given her space, respect, and safety. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling. Daniel turned, offering a small, warm smile. "You don't have to say anything, just eat something first. You need energy." For a long moment they sat in silence, a quiet understanding passing between them. Words were not needed. The shared experience of kindness and care had already spoken volumes. After finishing breakfast, the young woman finally found the courage to speak about her past. I've made mistakes," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I lost my family a few years ago. I didn't have anyone to turn to. I tried shelters, but they didn't always welcome me, and I ended up here." Her voice cracked, but she continued, "I've been on the streets for months. I thought no one would ever care. I thought I would always be alone." He understood that sometimes the greatest gift one can give is simply to listen. She continued, the words pouring out as if a dam had broken. She spoke of the shame she had carried, the fear of rejection, and the nights spent shivering in doorways and alleyways. She admitted the mistakes she had made, not to excuse them, but to explain the circumstances that had led her here. When she finally stopped, Daniel spoke gently. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. I can't change the past, but I can help you take the first step toward a better future. You deserve that chance." It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and she realized that not everyone in the world was cruel or indifferent. Some people, like Daniel, chose compassion over fear. Over the next few days, Daniel helped her in small but meaningful ways. He guided her to local aid organizations, helping her apply for temporary housing and food assistance. He helped her create a plan to slowly rebuild her life. Each step was small, but for someone who had lived so long in uncertainty and fear, even the smallest victories felt monumental. During this time, they developed a quiet companionship. It was not a friendship in the conventional sense, nor was it dependent or forced. It was built on trust, understanding, and shared humanity. The young woman who had once felt invisible began to feel seen. And Daniel, who had closed himself off from the world after years of disappointment, began to rediscover a sense of purpose he had long forgotten. She found a small job at a local bakery, something simple but honest. It gave her a routine, a reason to wake up each morning, and a sense of independence. Daniel helped her practice for interviews, offering advice on confidence and presentation. Slowly, her self-esteem grew. She began to believe in herself again, something she had thought impossible. One afternoon, as they sat in the small kitchen sharing a cup of tea, she turned to him with a soft smile. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't just save me from the cold. You saved my hope. You reminded me that people can be kind, that I can still start over." It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers, and she could finally feel safe in her own space. She continued to work at the bakery, gaining confidence and learning to trust in her abilities. Each day brought new challenges, but she faced them with a courage she had thought she lost forever. Before leaving, she visited Daniel one last time to express her gratitude. "I will never forget you," she said softly. "You didn't just give me warmth for one night. You gave me the courage to rebuild my life. You reminded me that kindness still exists in the world." Still, he understood that this was the true purpose of compassion, not to hold someone close indefinitely, but to give them the tools to stand on their own. As she left, he watched her walk down the street with a sense of dignity and hope he had never seen in her before. She paused for a moment, turned back, and waved. He waved back, feeling a deep warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he had truly made a difference. The story of that night and the days that followed stayed with him. It reminded him that even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, small acts of kindness could create ripples of hope. He had chosen to see her humanity, to offer compassion instead of judgment, and in doing so, both of their lives had been changed. Daniel returned to his own routine, but he was different now. He walked a little taller, smiled a little more, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that helping others did not always require grand gestures. Sometimes, it required simply being present, listening, and offering warmth to someone in need. For the young woman, life continued to improve. She made friends at work, joined a small community group, and slowly rebuilt the trust she had lost in people. She never forgot the man who had believed in her when the world had turned away. She carried his kindness in her heart, using it as inspiration to treat others with compassion whenever she could. And so, two lives that had intersected on a cold winter night continued to grow, shaped by the simple but profound act of human kindness. One had been given hope and a second chance, while the other had rediscovered the power of empathy and the joy that comes from helping someone rise again. In the end, it wasn't just about warmth or food. It was about seeing the person in front of you, recognizing their pain and choosing to care. And that choice, as small as it may seem, had the power to change lives, sometimes forever.